My name is Cookie Vazquez. We are part of the Spanish ministry at Cross Free Will Baptist Church. My husband is the pastor for the church. And we've been going to Cross Church approximately 4 years, a little over 4 years. When I was about 7, I got saved at the Greenfield Church that sadly is no longer in existence. The ironic thing is they didn't have a baptistry at that time, so it was probably 1978 or 77. So we went to the first Free Will Baptist Church, which is now Cross Church, because that church had a baptistry, and that's where I got baptized. So it's kind of, I made a full circle back to that church, which is interesting to me. I don't remember knowing the full, like if I died, I went to heaven. I don't think I had that full concept, but I did know that God was real. And I knew that if I asked him for something, that I would get it or he would fix it. So as far as him being real to me, he was. I knew that he existed. Even at a young age, I had an experience with him. He made himself true to me. And now that I look back, I know why he always made it seem very real to me, because he knew I was going to be a pastor's wife. So he made it very clear at the very beginning who he was and what he could do in my life. My childhood was pretty much like a normal childhood, what I thought was a normal childhood. My dad drank, my mom did not. Just a lot of parties, I remember, a lot of fights between my parents. Things did change somewhat when we did start church, when they started taking me to church. As a matter of fact, it changed drastically. My father quit drinking. There was still some issues, now that I know that what it is to be a new Christian and try to live by faith, knowing that now that God can fix anything. But as a new Christian, I understand that it's hard to give up control of your own life to Christ, especially if you can't see him. So I understand my parents now, looking back. And so it was difficult. But I do know that I love the Lord and that I knew that he was real. But unfortunately, after that, my parents had a hard time with it, so we didn't stay at our church very long. We also moved out of where we were living at the time, so eventually we all dropped out of church. We moved away to a very small town. I experienced a lot of racism, which I now know that it's racism. I got into a really deep depression. I didn't have a very good relationship with my parents. We did try to find a church there, but of course it was in our church from Bakersfield. They didn't even compare. I don't know if it's because we didn't give it a chance, or it's just hard to go to a different church. They didn't have a Free Will Baptist church over there, so we went to a Southern Baptist, and we just couldn't get in there. We just couldn't find a niche. I hung on to Christ as much as I could without being fed. As far as going to church or having God a main thing in our family. So we just fell back into, living the way we wanted to live. Like I was saying, I held on to Christ as much as I could. I wasn't a bad student. I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't doing all those things that teenage kids do. But I still held on to the one scripture that I knew is honor your parents. I knew that scripture. So I held on to that right up until the point that I graduated high school. And once I graduated, it was a newfound freedom in the world. I moved to Bakersfield, and it was nothing I had experienced before. There was so many people. I mean, our school and our whole school at the time, high school, there was only 72 students. So when I moved to Bakersfield, I really loved it. And they were people like me. They were Hispanics like me that were Americanized. So I didn't have any of that where I grew up. So I started drinking. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of boys, and it was just a really sad, lonely, dark place. I know there was times in between there. I moved to Bakersfield at 18, and I know that there was times in there that Christ would speak to me, and at those times I would go to church. But at that point, my sinful life was way more fun than getting up on a Sunday and going to church. So I lived my life 100% for Satan up until the age of 28. That year, 1998, sin wasn't fun anymore. I had friends in my life that weren't friends. God let that be known to me. They people that I thought would just stand up for me and fight for me, they didn't. And these were people that I had met when I was 18 when I moved to Bakersfield. So he was just kind of chipping away at me. So I remember one night after a night of just drinking all night long and doing some drugs, and I woke up somewhere where I didn't know where I was, and I just remember getting up, putting myself together as best as I could, and thinking, I was already 28 at the time, and I thought, man, this isn't what I want. I'm not doing anything good. Why am I here if I'm not doing anything good? So I went home, and at that time, my mom and dad were already back in church. They were going to New Hope, the Lamont Church. And my mom had kind of been telling me, you need to get back into church. And I was not about to do what she told me to do. So I fought it. I'd gone to church the beginning of that year, to the Lamont Church. And then I went sometime in the middle. And then I went again in December. But between the second and third time that I returned to church that year in 1998, my mom gave me a book. She knew I was a reader, and she knew that I liked reading books. And she goes, you should read this book. And she knew I liked to read scary books. I was a big Stephen King fan. So she gave me this book. It was called Left Behind. So I read it, and it just really scared me because it was about the end of the world and the rapture. And it just kind of put the fear back into me about going to hell. I knew hell was a real place. I knew that, and I knew that I didn't want to be there forever. So in December of 1998, it was the 13th of December, I went and I accepted Christ. I rededicated my life. I rededicated my life because I know that I was saved at 7. I rededicated my life, and then my journey began with Christ again. I know that he never left me, so I know that I picked up my journey. That's the way I like to see it. I picked up where I left off because I know that Christ never left me. There was a couple of times right before that year that I rededicated that I should have been dead. And I know that he was with me, and I know that he saved me for something special. And so I went back to church, and I absorbed everything that I heard. I went everywhere. I went everywhere. I went to quarterly meetings. I went to revivals. I just went everywhere, everywhere. And so, yeah, that's basically how I rededicated and got back to working for God. If you're wrestling with the decision that God has given you to make, it's wonderful that He gives you free will to either say yes or no. But I truly believe that you won't entirely be happy until you just say yes. You know, your Christian life is going to be like on a dimmer. You're just not going to be able to fully experience God's grace and what He has for your life if you just say yes. Eventually you're going to say yes, and I think that you would rather that you should say yes immediately than waiting 2 or 3 years, because He's eventually going to get His way. There's a lot of things that you can miss out if you don't immediately just say, okay, if you're calling me, then I know that I'm ready, and I know that I'll be able to do it. So I think that you miss out on a lot if you just kind of wrestle with Him for a long time. You know, He needs the job done. And I know eventually that if you don't say yes, He's going to give it to someone else to do. But, you know, that was for you. You know, He wanted you to do it. And there's a reason why He picked you. So I think that's another thing I've learned too. Just don't fight Him. Just don't fight. Just do it. Yeah.